Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Happy to be here with Martha's Vineyard Families virtually. For those of you who are going to be joining us, watching the recording, you will get a copy of these slides that you can link to as well. So let's get started. So before we even get into the nitty-gritty, we want to let you know about MEFA's email curriculum. And it's not just an email that you get. It's really, I look at our MEFA's email curriculum as almost like an entryway into a portal that will walk you through everything you need to know throughout this whole process. So if you're not on our emails yet, you can get signed up for those because we're going to have webinars. We have a FAFSA festival next week, for example, if you need help filling out the FAFSA. So things like that, scholarship alerts that we're going to be sending out through email. So you can sign up for those. But we also send out a lot of information via social media. If you, especially for students and folks who just like, quick snippets, lots of great posts that are easy and quick to read. If you like a good podcast, the MEFA podcast is a great follow as well. So connect with us in any way you can, because you'll be getting lots of great free information throughout this whole process based on the age of the student that you're working with or your child. So again, I mentioned that you can type any questions in the Q&A, and there is live transcription if you need that. And a little bit about MEFA. We are a quasi-state agency here in Massachusetts. So we are a nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1982. So probably one of the longest serving lenders nationwide, actually. I think Sally may have us beat by a couple years, but we're one of the most established lenders nationwide, as well as being a great resource for all of our families in here in Massachusetts with free guidance and education about the whole enrollment process. But for most of you right now, we're going to focus on the financial aid piece of it. But we do have savings plans and loans and all kinds of great other resources if you need those as well that we can talk about. So we can talk about a lot of things tonight, but here's what we're gonna focus on. We're gonna make sure you walk away understanding the sources of financial aid. What is financial aid? Where does it come from? How do you apply for it? What does the application process look like? How do financial aid officers and administrators at colleges make the decision of how much aid to give you? What type of aid to give you? We'll take away some of that myth a little bit. And then towards the end, we'll touch upon just some strategies that many families can use to help pay for college. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds about loan rates and things like that because we're at least 9 months away from that. You're not going to have a college bill if you have a high school senior right now until June of next summer. So we have time to talk about that. We have lots of programs where we'll get into the comparing loan options piece of it. But the email curriculum that you sign up with will let you know about all those spring and summer programs coming up as well. And then we'll also go through your timeline in free resources. So let's talk about what is financial aid. Obviously, it's money to help pay for college, but it's more than just grants and scholarships. Grants and scholarships are free money to help pay for college. We look at that as gift aid. It's what most people think of when they think of financial aid. And it is a component of financial aid, but it's not the only source. So there's also federal work study, which is a part-time job that a student can get on campus. It's allotted and given to families by the colleges and universities. It is a need-based program. So when people apply for financial aid, they'll be, looked at to see if they're eligible for that. But it is a great way for students to make a little money in a part-time job and put that towards some of the unbilled expenses. And the great thing about work study is that the monies that the student earns in income on that particular program does not get reported as income the following year in the FAFSA. So that's income from work study is actually protected in the financial aid formula too. And then another big piece of financial aid that most folks don't really consider financial aid, or might not think of it as financial aid, is federal student loans. And when it comes to this particular bullet, I like to underline the word student because there are lots of different types of federal loans out there, including the Federal Parent Plus loan, which is not financial aid, it's a credit-based loan. Excuse me, I have the allergies going on tonight. but it is a loan for students that they can take out on their own without a cosigner. So it is a great way for them to help contribute towards the bill. And we're going to get into fine detail on that particular loan program in a second. So here's a little bit more detail about the federal direct student loan. So this is the loan that students take out on their own. Many of you who, if you went to college, you probably borrowed this loan yourself. The nice thing about the federal direct student loan is that the students, they only borrow on the loan. They don't need a cosigner, and they can defer that loan while they're in school. If they go to grad school, they can defer it. So it has a lot more flexibility than a regular private loan that you might get from your bank, or a different lender. So there is no real program out there where a student who is, say, maybe 18 years old, might not be working full time and needs to borrow about 27,000 to get through college, which is, the annual loan limits here. A bank's not going to lend to a student like that without a creditworthy cosigner to back up that loan. So it is a nice way for students to contribute towards a bill, have a little skin in the game. They can borrow up to about 27,000 as a undergraduate. So that payment is going to be about $300 a month if they borrow the max. So for most students, $300 a month should be reasonable when they graduate to pay back. Excuse me, but they don't have to make payments on that. And the one thing you'll want to think about when you're looking at borrowing in general for college is how much is the student able to take on with borrowing above and beyond this loan. So it might take more than just the federal direct student loan to pay the bill. So you want to consider, if you're co-signing loans, how much is the student realistically going to be able to pay back? So this loan should be fine for them to pay back, but if they start taking on other private loans and co-sign loans, it might get a little steep when they go to graduate. Now, it can come in two different ways: subsidized and unsubsidized. The subsidized portion of the loan, excuse me, is going to be interest-free. So you can see the annual loan limits are right here on the right. We have freshman year loan. We'll use that as an example. The max they can take out is $5,500, which I mentioned is not probably going to get the bill paid at most schools, but it can contribute towards it. So with that freshman year loan, up to $3,500 of it could be subsidized. So not the full amount. And the subsidy is based on family's financial need when you fill out that FAFSA form. So not every family is going to get a subsidy. Not every student is going to get part of their loan subsidized. Some students, and for some families, the entire loan could also be unsubsidized, meaning interest will accrue on that portion of the loan. So you'll just, when you get your financial aid offers, you'll see if you qualify for the subsidy, it'll say subsidized, and then it will usually have a separate line for the unsubsidized portion. And the total can add up to $5,500 for a freshman. Now, the interest rate is fixed for the life of the loan. Right now, it's at 6.39% for the current academic year. For high school seniors that might be on the line, your rate will be set on July 1st for the upcoming year, for 26-27 next year, when you're going to be a freshman. And with that interest rate, it does change every year on July 1st. We usually find out about what that rate is sometime in May. So that's when you'll find out. So really, you could end up with 4 separate loans for each year of school, and each loan might have a separate interest rate. But whatever that fixed interest rate is when the student borrows the loan, that is going to be the rate on that loan for the life of that loan. And then in addition to just being able to borrow these loans without a cosigner, there is a lot more flexibility with deferment and forbearance and repayment options on the back end too, for students. So that's another good benefit of this type of loan. So where does financial aid come from? The federal government obviously is going to be a big source. You can find more about the details of their programs at studentaid.gov. But basically, when you're filling out the financial aid forms, we're going to talk about monies from the federal government, the state government, and here in Massachusetts, and the college are really going to be determined how much you're eligible for by the financial aid forms that you're filling out. So with the federal loans, it's going to be determined whether you're eligible for that Pell Grant or work study or any subsidy on that loan, for example. In Massachusetts, by putting that you're a Mass resident, your FAFSA information, we'll talk about the FAFSA form, that will be sent to OSFA, and their website is listed here as well. to be considered for the Mass Grant, for example. They also run the state scholarship, the John Abigail Adams Scholarship. So they run all the state grants and scholarship programs here in Massachusetts. And then there's the college or university. And most colleges and universities do give out financial aid in some way, shape, or form. Some a lot more than others because they might have a much bigger cost and bigger endowment. A community college, which has a much lower cost, they might not have as big an endowment to give a lot of extra grants and scholarships from their own institution, but their cost is much lower. So the amount you have to come up with would be lower. Whereas maybe at a private college or university, they might have a higher sticker price, so they might have more monies to put forth so that families can afford to go to their school. It really varies from school to school, what kind of financial aid they have and how much. But you can find that information out on their website. Typically, they'll have information about the types of grants and scholarships, maybe average indebtedness, things like that. They usually have data on financial aid on their website. And then there's other agencies and other avenues to apply for scholarships. So John mentioned Martha's Vineyard has a very generous scholarship program, which we refer to as a local scholarship through your local high school. So you definitely want to make sure the student is putting effort into that application or applications, because there's less students applying for those scholarships than a national scholarship, for example. Don't shy away, don't make sure they don't shy away from any scholarship applications that require an essay, because a lot of students, when they're done with this process, they don't want to create new essays or write any new essays from scratch. But typically students can repurpose some of their admissions essays or use some of it towards a scholarship essay if it's required. But again, less students want to apply for those scholarships because they require essay, so there's less competition. And then there's search engines that students can go in, such as MEFApathway.org. We have a link on our website there to a national search engine. There's FastWeb, College Board has a scholarship search. And you can basically, the student goes on those sites and puts in demographic information, and they get emails about scholarships they might be eligible to apply for. So they can go ahead and do that. Whatever time the student is able to put into applying for extra scholarships above and beyond the applications, the FAFSA and the profile we're talking about tonight, any amount of money, even if it's $500, I like to say if they can spend a couple hours on a Saturday filling out scholarships, maybe it only gets them two $500 scholarships, but at least, that was, $500 worth an hour of the work they put in to get there. So it's worth the work. Even those small amounts can add up. Freshman year tends to be an expensive year where students need to get stuff for their dorm and all that good stuff. So they need a little extra money that freshman year, so it can come in handy. So many scholarships are based on a student's merit or academic achievements or skills. There's also financial need-based scholarships, grants, and financial aid. So it's two different types. The first, merit-based aid, is typically awarded through the admissions process from a college. So you might get a grant or scholarship from the school based on the overall admissions application. Students might see athletic scholarships or artistic scholarships. Those are a lot more rare than general academic scholarships, but a lot of students do get those as well. But it is all based on the student's merit, academic, their achievements and skills. Now, there could be renewability requirements with any type of financial aid as well as merit-based aid, particularly with merit-based aid. Maybe if it's from the college or university, you want to find out when it's awarded to you, if you're going to go to that school, what is the minimum GPA that the student needs to maintain that scholarship? Is it a 3.0, a 2.8, a 2.0? And if they don't meet that GPA, what happens to that scholarship? Do they lose it? Do they lose a portion of it? Do they get a semester to get their grades back up? You'll just want to know what the fine details are, because sometimes coming from a college or university, the monies they're putting forward might be a pretty significant chunk if it's an academic scholarship. And if the student loses that, there'll be a big hole in the bill the next year. So you want to make sure the student understands their responsibility to maintain that merit-based aid once it's awarded. Now, not every college in the country offers merit-based aid, which is always surprising to some families. Now, what colleges wouldn't be offering merit-based aid? There's a handful, small handful of very competitive schools nationwide that all of their students are meritorious. I'm talking Harvard, MIT, schools like that, Ivy League schools where, they have a 7 to 10% approval rate, very expensive. They might not offer any merit-based aid. So they might have a lot more money in need-based aid that they're going to dole out, but they might not offer a merit-based scholarship. So don't be surprised if a student gets into one of those schools and you don't get a merit-based scholarship from Yale or Harvard, because they don't give those. But most colleges and universities do. So make sure you have a lot of different schools on that list. And for some schools, the admissions deadline is coming up for early action, early decision as early as November, and your financial aid deadlines might be due then as well. We'll talk more about the financial aid deadlines in a second. Now, financial need-based aid is where most aid lives. That's where most of the financial aid given out nationwide comes from, is a need-based formulas based on financial need. So really analyzing a family's eligibility by the forms that you're going to fill out, which we'll talk about in a second, standardized formulas that treat, families the same. Now, grants and scholarships can be awarded through need-based aid, through need-based formulas, but also that subsidy on that federal direct student loan I talked about in the work study program. Those are all based on financial need. Now, the GPA criteria is typically a 2.0 to maintain need-based aid, but you'll just want to find out if it's school-based aid, what that GPA is. But typically students do need to be making satisfactory academic progress. So meeting a minimum amount of credits, a minimum GPA, things like that to maintain their aid. So if a student is, enrolled in 5 classes freshman year and they decide, oh, I'm not doing so good in 3 or 4 of those, and they drop them, they might lose their financial aid because they're only in 1 or 2 classes now. So it is good just to know what the basic criteria is to maintain any type of aid that the student is receiving. All right, so that's a little bit about the type of aid that's out there. Now let's talk about the application process and how to access that financial aid. So the timeline right now is really important. There's a lot going on at once, the fall of senior year. And you already know this, I'm sure. So you want to make sure that not only what are those admissions deadlines at each of the schools the student's applying to, but what is the financial aid deadline? Because the financial aid deadline is usually very close to the admissions deadline. It might be a few weeks later. It might be a month or 2 later, but it's typically going to be sometime between November and March, depending on how the student's applying and what the school is. So if you don't find out if the student's accepted till April, then you can't wait until the student's accepted to apply for financial aid. You got to apply for financial aid, put all the schools the student's applying to on that form to be considered. And then the schools that the student is accepted to, they will give you a financial aid offer. You won't get financial aid offers from any schools that the student is not accepted to. So again, we have a college application manager here. You can create your own spreadsheet, whatever works, just to make sure you know what is the admissions deadline, the financial aid deadline, but also what financial aid forms does that school require? Because all schools are going to require the FAFSA, which we'll talk about, but some require the CSS profile or their own institutional application too. So you really do need to know at each school what those deadlines are. And typically, if you're meeting the earliest deadline, you put all the colleges on that list on the financial aid forms, then you've met all the later deadlines as well. So you really just want to focus on those early deadlines and make sure all those schools are listed on your students' applications. And you can also scan this QR code. Sorry, I'm having allergies and I had to take a sip. You can scan this QR code to access our college application manager as well. All right, let's talk about the FAFSA. Now, we do have a webinar on the FAFSA to help you, really go line through line. If you need help, we have a FAFSA festival next Wednesday or 2 Wednesdays from now on October 22nd, I think it is, where you can log into a Zoom like this one and get help sharing your screen on filling out the FAFSA. So there is help to fill it out, but it really is not as difficult as it used to be. So it is simplified. There's a lot of skip logic to it. It's much clearer than ever. Some families are filling it out in as little as 10 minutes, and they think they made a mistake because it was so easy. So every college and university is going to require this of you. The state of Massachusetts is going to require you fill this out. And some scholarship entities might also require the FAFSA or even the CSS profile. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you get this form filled out. Now you can start filling it out whenever you want, but go to FAFSA.gov. That's where you can access the 26-27 FAFSA. So if the student is a high school senior, that's the one you want to fill out. And we highly recommend with this new FAFSA process that the student start the FAFSA, fill out their section first. And then when they're finished with their section, they're easily able to invite their contributor. We'll talk about what a contributor is and who that is in a second, and then invites them to log in themselves and fill out their section of the form. Seems to work out best that way. So have the student start it first. The parent can be right there beside the student while they're filling it out, making sure, they do it right if you want to, but, log in together, make sure that you do that section first, and then you'll invite your contributor. Now, the contributor is usually going to be a parent or both parents who will complete their contributor section of the form. Whoever the last contributor is to finish this FAFSA, they can be the ones that submit it. If you start a FAFSA and you don't touch it, log in, make any updates, changes before submitting it within 45 days of no activity, then your FAFSA will get wiped out and you have to start over. So it's not going to take you 45 days to fill it out, but if you start it and then forget, there is a little counter on there that will tell you, finish up your FAFSA. You only have 30 days left or whatever it is. But regardless, you can always fill it out. You just might have to start over if you wait a couple months before you finish it. Now, everybody that is filing that is going to be on the FAFSA, such as the student and the contributors, they're going to need what's called an FSA ID. It's also called an account. So you see here on the screen, it says create an account. The account is your FSA ID. You can use those terms interchangeably. And the FSA ID is going to be a username that you select. Typically, you can use your email and a password. So it's basically your credentials to log into the FAFSA and fill it out and submit it and sign it electronically. You can't get into the FAFSA without an FSA ID. So you can set up that FSA ID now if you don't already have one. For parents who might be listening, if you already have an FSA ID from, maybe you have an older student who you've used that in the last year or two, you can use your FSA ID for all of your children. So each individual only needs one, and you can use it for all purposes for applying for financial aid. You do have to have a valid email address. Don't use the student's high school email address. Have them create a new one for, a new personal email address like a Gmail or something, because that high school email address is usually shut off after they graduate. So you'll want something that they're going to, be able to have forever, so that they don't have trouble, logging into their FSA ID or FAFSA next year. Now, who is going to need one? Obviously, the student needs one because they need to use that to log in, file their FAFSA. They'll also use that account to fill out their master promissory note for their federal student loan. The parents are going to need an FSA ID. If parents file their taxes jointly, then only one of those parents or contributors needs an FSA ID, and they can fill out the information for both. However, if parents are married and they filed taxes separately, then each parent contributor is going to have to get their own FSA ID and fill out their own section individually. So if you don't file jointly, then each parent will have to fill out their own section. Now that's only if they're married. I'll talk about who the contributor will be if it's a divorced or separated situation on the next slide. Now, if the student is married, then the student's spouse would also need an FSA ID. Now, Families, parents, contributors who do not have a social security number can get an FSA ID now. That is a new thing with this newer FAFSA. They won't be able to, obviously use a social security number and have the social security match when they're setting it up, but they will be able to answer credit-based questions from their credit bureau report to authenticate they are who they are to get an FSA ID. So students who might have a parent who's not a US citizen or permanent resident or doesn't have a social security number, they can still fill out the FAFSA and access it electronically. Okay, so what is going to be reported on the FAFSA? Obviously, general demographic, address, information. The student citizenship status is going to be on there. So all US citizens and eligible non-citizens, such as permanent residents, can receive federal financial aid and file the FAFSA. Undocumented students may not be eligible for applying for the FAFSA if they're not eligible for federal aid. However, I'll talk about it later in the session. There is a MASFA form where they can fill that out to be considered for Massachusetts state aid and in-state tuition. So there is, a little bit of an opportunity there that we'll talk about. And then obviously the schools that the student is applying to, those will be listed on the form. You can add up to 20 on the initial submission. So you'll want to put all the schools the student's thinking about applying to. Even if they don't end up applying, it's okay that they were sent the FAFSA information. They're not going to do anything with it until they get that admissions application in the door. The parents' information are going to be who the parents are is going to be reported on the form. So if parents are married, including same-sex parents, then both parents' information are going to be on the form. Even if the parents are not married but they live together, then both parents' information is going to be on the form. If the parents are divorced or separated, and it doesn't have to be legally separated, they could be just recently separated, the parent who's on the form is going to be the parent who provided the most financial support in the last 12 months in their current spouse if they're remarried. So I'll just repeat that one because this one gets a lot of questions. So in a divorced or separated situation, the contributor that needs the FSA ID and will fill out the FAFSA is going to be the parent who provides more than 50% of the financial support in the last 12 months in their current spouse if they're remarried. Now, with some parents that are divorced or separated, they split everything 50-50. Usually it's not to the penny, so you can, choose one or the other. But if it is a true, 50-50 split, then you would have the parent that has the greater income and assets fill out the FAFSA. Legal guardians are not considered a parent for FAFSA purposes. They do not put their information on the FAFSA form. The number of dependents in the household will be pulled in automatically from the IRS, but you can update that if it's not accurate or if it's, changed. The number of children in college is still reported on the FAFSA form, but it's not used in calculation for federal or state aid. However, some colleges and universities may use that for their own institutional aid. So what is reported on the FAFSA? Obviously, financial information is going to be reported. So parent and student income for families who are have high school seniors this year. So you're filling out the 26-27 FAFSA. The income information that's going to be pulled from the IRS for you is going to be from 2024. So 2025 will be sophomore year in college. That's when that income will be reported. So it's always 2 years prior. So filling out the FAFSA, it's very easy now. You just give consent and it automatically downloads your information from the IRS as far as all that tax data, both tax and untaxed income that appears on your tax return will be listed there. And then you're also going to list any parent and student assets. So the value of any checking or savings accounts, business assets, things like that. Any education savings accounts, such as a 529 plan. Now, I do want to mention with the 529 plans, this is somewhat new from the last 2 years, is that you only have to report the 529 value for the student who is on that FAFSA form. So you could have three 529s for three different children. You only have to report the 529 for the student on that FAFSA. You're not going to include the value of your primary residence. If you have a vacation home, for example, or rental property, you would be reporting the equity in those properties, but not your primary residence. Life insurance is not reported. Family farms, small business is under 100 employees is not reported, or commercial fishing businesses. So those assets related to those businesses are not reported. Child support received is reported as an asset, not income. And that's important to know because assets or income is treated much more heavily in the FAFSA formula and really any financial aid formula. It's very much a highly income driven formula, whereas assets aren't looked at as heavily as income. So it does benefit, if you have money, a 529, for example, or child support, it's better to have that reported as an asset. So that's a good thing. Now, debt is not reported on the FAFSA except for debt that might be on reported assets, for example. And I do have a question in there about the family farm. We can get into that one later. They do provide information on the FAFSA when you're filling that out. So you can just read that information. It should be pretty helpful, but feel free to give MEFA a call when you're filling out your FAFSA. If you do have a farm you're not sure, or call the college as well. All right, so that's the FAFSA form. Now let's talk about the CSS profile, because the CSS profile is going to be a form that many colleges and universities, particularly private colleges and universities, are going to require if to be determined for their own institutional aid. So you can fill that out right on cssprofile.org. And you can also find the list of schools on that website. So there's about, I don't know, probably about 200 colleges or so that require this form. There is a cost to it. However, the CSS profile asks for a lot more information than the FAFSA form. So you will find that profile form will take longer to fill out. But there is a good reason for that. These colleges that have you fill out the profile, they have a lot of funds and endowment funds that they want to give out in financial aid. So they're going to ask a lot more questions to make sure that they're doling it out appropriately to the families, that need it the most based on their formulas for financial aid. So they're going to ask a lot more questions, but sometimes that can be a really good thing because they might be asking about the number of students in college, things that could help you maybe access more financial aid, things that they can take into consideration. So it is good to be working with the college and, fill out this form. It's $25 to have it sent to one school and $16 for each additional school that you want it sent to. When you're filling out the form, there are fee waivers that happen automatically before you submit the form if parent income is less than 100,000 or families meet other need-based means criteria, for example, such as free lunch. It is available now. And on this form, a little bit different from then the FAFSA form, the non-custodial parent and their spouse, if they're remarried, does need to fill out their own separate non-custodial profile. So when you're filling out the profile form, both parents, including their current spouses, if it's divorced or separated situation, are going to be, everybody's information is going to be on the profile. And we do have a webinar on how to fill out this form as well that has a lot of helpful tips. So I would definitely, take a look at both of those webinars if you want a little bit more detail on the form. And then some colleges, instead of the profile form, they may have a shortened institutional form that they'll have you fill out to determine their own institutional aid. All right, so after you apply, after you submit the forms, the colleges and the state will receive here in Massachusetts from the FAFSA your data electronically. A couple days after your submission, the student will get the FAFSA submission summary by email, so the FSS. And that will be, basically everything that was filled out on the FAFSA. You're not going to see income information. Anything that was pulled from the IRS is not going to be is going to be kind of blacked out on there, so you won't see that, but all the information will be on there. Colleges may also request additional documentation. I'll talk about verification in a second, so you want to get that in there. So once all the information is in there, the colleges are going to review all this information to determine your financial aid offer. Now, the financial aid offer might be sent with the admissions letter if the student is accepted, or it might be timed to come a week or two later. Sometimes it might be paper mail, it could be email, it could be something that you download on the school's portal, but it's really important throughout this whole process for the students to be reading their emails, staying on top of the mail, because a lot of this stuff is coming to the student. So be aware of that. And then also just make sure you're looking at all those deadlines on the college's websites to make sure that you know what they need and when they need it. So I mentioned verification. Some families might be selected for verification either by the Department of Education or by the college. And the department will actually have the college do their verification for them. So the college is going to request documentation from you if you're selected, such as tax return transcripts. They might look at business statements, whatever information they're trying to verify, they'll let you know what they need and tell you how to provide it to them. But you do have to comply with these requests or else your financial aid offer is not going to be finalized. So it's important to be reading that emails, reading the mail that's coming in the door, and logging into that college portal. So don't be afraid of calling the financial aid office and working with them. Utilize them as a resource. They typically might have sessions or great information on their website. Sometimes you might even be able to set up a Zoom or a phone call with them. But they're there to really help you access as much financial aid as you're eligible for. That's what their goal is. They don't want to hold back money from you. They want you to get as much as they can provide based on your eligibility. So that's what they're looking to do. So definitely work with them as if you have special circumstances that you need to talk about. Maybe, you're applying for the FAFSA, let's say in November, and then in February, one of the contributors has lost their job. One of the parents has lost their job. So you'll want to be in touch with the financial aid office about that. If you need to appeal your financial aid offer, you would do that through the financial aid office. So really look at them as a resource. You will be reporting private scholarships, any private scholarships you receive, even the ones that, we mentioned earlier that you'll get through your local high school in June. Those do need to be reported to the financial aid office at the college, and they'll let you know how they'll add that to your financial aid offer. So at most colleges, there's going to probably be a gap, and most colleges will put any outside scholarships towards any unmet need that you might have. But they'll tell you what that policy is and any renewability criteria for their aid. All right, so I do see that there are a few questions in there. Some I might hold till the end, but let me just take a quick peek and see. I'll hold off on any of the business questions till the end, but I do have a real quick one that is pretty easy to answer. So one question is, in divorced or separated families, is the custodial parent decision made each year? So it's not about custody. It's about the contributor is going to be the parent that provided the most financial support over the last 12 months. It might not be the custodial parent. So the contributor on the FAFSA could be different from year to year because some families might, might not be 50-50 year to year. So that that contributing parent on the FAFSA form could be different from year to year based on your family's finances. So I'm going to hold off on some of these other ones that dig into the business accounts. I'll hold off on that in a sec because we're getting close to the 1 hour mark and we have a little bit more to get through. So I'll get back to those questions at the end. All right, so how do financial aid folks figure out your financial aid offer? First, they're going to take your cost of attendance at their school. So that's the sticker price, the full amount, the maximum amount it would cost to go to that school for 1 year. That's going to include build expenses such as tuition and fees. If the student's living on campus, it's going to include food and housing. It's going to include unbilled expenses like books and supplies. So there will be a budget in your cost of attendance for these unbilled line items such as transportation, personal expenses. The other thing that I'll mention, because we usually get a lot of questions, is off-campus housing. That is considered in the cost of attendance as well. And the college will usually have a general budget that they'll allocate as off-campus housing, but you can submit rent and utility bills to document that. But that is considered, you can get financial aid for off-campus housing as well. It's treated just like on-campus housing for financial aid purpose. It's just an unbilled expense, not a billed expense. So they'll take that number and look at your student aid index, which is going to be determined based on the financial aid forms that we just talked about you filling out. So the student aid index is a number that represents your family's financial strength for that 1 year. So it's basically a number that you can expect to have to contribute. I always look at this number as a starting point, since most families end up having to pay more than that, because most colleges in the country, except for a small handful, can't meet 100% of a family's need. Income, as I mentioned, weighs much more heavily on this process than assets. It's a bigger number that's used to determine financial aid, a bigger percentage. For example, some colleges may also have their own institutional formula to determine an SAI for their own institutional aid. But it is all based on the family's, is the primary responsibility to pay the bills with the family. But the colleges are going to try and get you access to as much financial aid as you're eligible for to try and help, lighten that load. So that your SAI is not necessarily what you will pay, but it is a good indicator of a minimum amount that you might need to pay. And we do have an SAI calculator on MEFA.org that you can play around with, especially if you're on the line, you're not a high school senior, you have younger kids, something like that, and you want to project out, that's a good tool to use. So they're going to take your cost of attendance, deduct your SAI, your student aid index, and whatever's left over, that's what you're eligible for in financial aid at that school. So then the college will take that information and try and give you a financial aid offer. So in this example, the college's cost is $45,000. They're gonna try and fill up this square, fill up this bucket. First thing they'll put in is the SAI. So in this example, the family's SAI is $5,000. Then they're going to put in any free monies that the student's eligible for from the school, from the state, from the federal government. Most colleges are going to list their own institutional aid right there at the top, so you know what they're giving you. And then you'll usually see federal and state aid if you're eligible underneath that. So you see your free monies there. Then the federal student loan is usually going to be packaged in there for $5,500. You might see it broken up into a subsidized amount and an unsubsidized amount, but usually the total should equal $5,500. If a college doesn't award you the full $5,500, let's say they just put in the subsidized portion, the student can still get up to $5,500. They just have to ask the financial aid office to add that to their financial aid package. The work study allotment, if the student is eligible for work study, that will be on there as well. But keep in mind, the work study is not going to usually be applied to the bill. That's going to be money that the student earns. They have to apply for that job and get a paycheck every couple weeks, and that will help pay for some of those unbilled expense line items. So in this example, the school came pretty close to filling up the bucket, but they fell short about $5,000, and we call that unmet need or a gap. So that's where a college might say, okay, you got $2,000 outside scholarship from Martha's Vineyard. We'll put that towards the unmet need. So you'll just want to know how they're going to treat that. But in this example, the family might have an SAI of 5,000, but they have to come up with actually 10,000. If you are looking to find out, okay, my student's a junior, but I want to know how much is it going to cost our family to send the student to Suffolk University, you could go on their school's website and use a net price calculator. So every college in the country has to have one on these on their website. And it's basically a way for you to confidentially put in your financial information to get an estimate of what you might be expected to pay at that school. Now, not every school has the same type of net price calculator. A lot of colleges might have a more sophisticated one that incorporates merit-based components, like you might be reporting GPAs or test scores, things like that. But it is a good tool to project out, help take away some of that um, mystery about what you might be expected to pay, especially if your student is not a high school senior and you're not yet ready to apply for financial aid. This is a good tool to use. So we have a great program in the spring called Paying the College Bill and Understanding Your Financial Aid Offers, where we're going to get into comparing financial aid offers in a lot more detail. But I like this slide because it kind of gives you a snapshot of some examples of financial aid offers at 3 schools that cost the same. 45,000. Family is an SAI of 5,000. So they're eligible for 40,000 at each school. But you can see that that every school, even though they cost the same, they didn't give the family the same amount of grants and scholarships. They gave them all the same amount in student loans and work study, but College A gave a lot more money, free money, than college B and C. So why would that be? Why is there a discrepancy of 7 and 15,000 at colleges B and C? It could be a number of reasons. It could be based on the student's merit, academic performance. Maybe college A is less selective than college C. It could just be a budgetary reason. Maybe college A has a much bigger endowment. It really could be a lot of things. But you can always call the financial aid office if you're not sure, if you feel like you have more information to provide for an appeal, things like that. And we do have a college cost calculator that you can use, and we'll walk you through this in the spring as well, where you can plug in all your financial aid offers and really compare them side by side. And MEFA can help you out. Our counselors at MEFA can help you do that too. And this is another example of, some financial aid offers, and you can see the big differences here. It looks like the unmet need is the same at each school, but that's because schools B and C, they put in $10,000 and $20,000 Parent Plus loans. So just be wary that some colleges might put in a federal Parent Plus loan in the financial aid offer. It's not financial aid, and it's not even the best loan to take out, because the federal parent loan rates are actually much higher than even MEFA's loan rate. So you can pay for your balance however you choose. All right, so I know we have some questions, but let me keep going, and I'll have a few more slides to get through, and then I will answer your questions. And the ones I can't answer tonight, we can email you with any answers. So how do families pay this bill? Looking at a balance due of $20,000, there's not one right or wrong way to pay the bill. It's going to be individual by family. So some families have been able to save, some families haven't. Most families have not been able to save 100%. So in this example, family didn't have 20,000 saved, but they do have a little bit saved. So they've decided student's going to work over the summer, put a little bit of savings in there, and maybe the parents have a 529 of, let's say, 16,000, and they've decided they're gonna split it out 4,000 a year over 4 years. So that's helping chip away at that $20,000 balance. And then they don't want to borrow it all, but they can contribute, a little bit more, maybe out of pocket on an interest-free payment plan through the college. So in this example, the family has said, I can afford about $600 a month. So let me put $500 a month on a $5,000 payment plan, interest-free over 10 months through the college. And I've chopped my bill in half by using savings and my current income before looking at borrowing. You can borrow the full amount if you need to, but at MEFA, we're always going to try and guide you towards using borrowing as a last resort. In this example, they still had to borrow, but at least they borrowed half of what they owed versus the full 20,000. So some conversations you should be having as a family is just really looking at those net prices and who's going to pay for these costs, how much are parents going to be able to contribute or borrow if there does need to be borrowing. Consider community colleges or even our in-state universities that have lower in-state costs for our residents. When you're looking at borrowing, just be wary of, do you have other students coming down the line? You don't want to max out on borrowing on student one if you have a couple other students who might need help as well. So think about that, as well as, it's an annual process, but think about a 4-year plan. You're applying for financial aid each year and you might need to borrow each year. But if you do need to borrow, use that minimum loan payment year one, multiply it by 4 so you can project out, if I have 4 of these loans, what is my monthly payment going to be? So that you can make sure before the student even deposits at that college that you have a plan to pay for all 4 years. Now, I will let you know, again, we'll talk about this a lot more in the spring when we're helping you figure out how to pay the bill. But a new change has come to the federal parent loan. This doesn't affect MEFA loans. We can lend you whatever you need, the full amount, but there are going to be caps coming up for the next academic year on the federal parent plus loan. So a family will only be able to borrow up to $20,000 a year and up to $65,000 total for the entire family, not just for that student. So if you're looking at higher amounts, you might want to look at a different loan option than the plus loan. And also, you want to think about debt and if the student's expected to help contribute, can they do that if you're borrowing? So I'm going to have you guys all scan this QR code because we are at that hour mark and I know we have a few questions, but I will point out a few good things on here through the state. I will tell you that the dollar amount that the state of Massachusetts has given, the budgets have definitely increased the last few years, which is really good. So more state monies available. I mentioned that MASFA form for students who might be undocumented and need to apply for aid just through the state of Massachusetts. But take a look at these programs. There's a lot of detail here, and you can definitely look into that. Your timeline is right here as well. So right now we're in fall of senior year. There's a QR code to get a lot more detail on this timeline with links to articles and things like that to walk you through every step of this process. But right now you can be getting those FSA IDs, start filling out those financial aid forms, all of that good stuff. Make sure you're getting our emails. And if you want to register for any of those webinars, you'll get these slides and you can scan these QR codes as well. And that is it for the formal slides, and I can go back to any of them, but I'll start answering questions now. But if folks do need to go, I do want to just let you know that we are available at MEFA 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. If you have a question about anything during this process, you can call us or email us at collegeplanning@mefa.org, and we can help you out. We do one-on-one appointments, things like that. So definitely, be in touch if you need help throughout the year. All right, so I'm going to take a quick break, start looking at the Q&A, but John, is there anything that you wanted to mention before I dive into the questions?
No, that's great. As always, you covered so much, and the recording, like we said, will be on there. But I would encourage all families to reach out to MEFA. Really, truly is a nonprofit. They're not trying to sell you anything, and they help families with a lot of these individual questions. So their webinars are great besides this one, and they get into specific topics. And if you just go and register on their sites, you'll just get lots of helpful emails and updates, and families have found it very helpful. But I
Yeah,
know you
and
have
we'll
a couple
email
questions.
everybody a link to this with the slides and it'll have all the QR codes. So you'll get that in your email.
That's great.
So no worries there. All right, let me just answer a couple of these quick questions. Someone wants to know the definition of a small business. So that would be a small business of 100 employees or less. If your business is smaller than that, you don't have to report the assets on that business. There's one that I am going to have to email you back about it because I just want to double check about commercial fishermen. So let me email you back about that one tomorrow. I'll get back to you on that one. Okay, and then we have another person here who did fill out a net price calculator and it asked for the SAI. Usually net price calculators don't ask for an SAI, so I'm not sure. You might want to just take a look at that. If it's through the college or university, they're the only ones who have net price calculators. So I would maybe print out your results and talk to that college or university because it is their calculator. So I would definitely, if you're seeing discrepancies or you're not sure what information to put in, just talk to the college or university about that.
I would echo that part too, Stephanie. Maybe there was a glitch on something in that individual school, because you should just be able to go on to just a website anytime and just plug in some numbers
Yep.
without having to have done the FAFSA and get that
Right, right.
SAI.
And then we just have one more question that I'm going to answer by email tomorrow. So we'll get back to you on the commercial fisherman question business. And that's it. That's all we have for questions.
Great. Well, thank
So
you,
we're good.
Stephanie, and thank you everybody for joining us. Again, with the local scholarship program will roll out in January, so you can focus on the FAFSA stuff and applications. We again want to put in a pitch. Lots of seniors have been taking advantage of it. Seniors can come in 3 days a week during Flex, first and second Flex, 3 different days. All the counselors kind of are in our conference room. So lots of kids have been coming in to just fill out applications, ask questions, hang out with their friends because they might have some similar things. But kids have been banging out some of these applications, and I know it's a stressful time for everybody, especially with early action and early decision deadlines coming in the middle of October and November. But if we can help in any way, if you feel like your kids aren't talking to you at all about this, email Cindy and she can put you in touch with your kid's guidance counselor. And if I can help in any way, just as like just even consulting, you're more than welcome. I have parents that reach out to me all the time. So if you feel like you're missing something, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But Stephanie, thank you as
All
always. It
right.
was great.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.